former Congressman Joe DioGuardi, recently spoke before the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, saying, "We are here today to pay tribute to the victims of communism all over the world. I want to say a few words about the most brutal, atheistic communist regime that held the Albanian people hostage in their country, which has turned into a prison through state-sponsored terror with crimes against humanity as its hallmark." Sadly, this story, as you well know, Joe, in communist country after communist country, past and present, is a common story, is a common part of history, and it's a sad, sad part of history.
The great statesman Edmund Burke said, to remind your audience, all that is necessary for evil to prevail is that good people do nothing. That's what allowed communism and fascism to flourish. Good people did nothing. They bought into the rhetoric. They bought into whatever, was good for them and not for the nation. One of the great awakenings I had is that, when your parents are poor and they don't have an education, they don't have really a good way to explain the history in their country, let alone the history from 600 years ago when my father's people fled the onslaught of the Ottoman Turks across the Adriatic into Italy, where today you have 51 Albanian-speaking villages, believe it or not. 600 years, and they kept that language alive. And my father comes here in 1929 at the age of 15, not speaking a word of English, but speaking Italian and Albanian. And I didn't know until I was a freshman congressman when Albanians from Yugoslavia in those days, Kosovo, overheard my father speaking to his younger sister at my first fundraiser as a congressman, and they came running up to me, "Hey, your dad's speaking Albanian. We thought you were Italian-American." Well, I'm American, but yeah, we have this subculture, and it has something to do with the Turks, maybe the Romans. No, you're from Kosovo. You saved our language. The Albanian monks for 600 years kept the Turks from stealing our language and our religion. I mean, an amazing story. And then they lobbied me day and night about the oppression in Yugoslavia of Albanians in Macedonia, Montenegro. These were the republics, Kosovo, of former Yugoslavia under Marshal Tito. Not as bad as Albania, but a communist system where Albanians were treated third class. When you go to Albania across the border, where they were kind of artificially separated after the Balkan Wars in 1920, or the late teens and the early 20s, there you had, in 1945, the most repressive regime we've seen, except for the Nazis, after the Albanians fought off Mussolini's fascists who occupied them until Mussolini was hung by his toes, and then the Nazis moved in. They had to fight them, only to be delivered to a psychopath called Enver Hoxha, who built 40-foot statues to himself and imprisoned almost anybody and burned over 300 churches, killed monks on the street, and you had even rabbis there. Why? Because there were Jews in Albania from the burning of the Second Temple in 70 A.D. in the Spanish Inquisition. This is what the Albanians had to put up with. And when I was asked to speak at the 5th anniversary of this, I said, I must drop everything and go down there and tell the real story. And what I did, I hope is historical, because in 1990, I was the first to be allowed into that prison called Albania. After 45 years, I brought Congressman Tom Lantos, a Democrat who was chairman of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, with me. But in this, 22 years later, his wife was sitting in the front. She came with us on that trip. And I said, Annette, Mrs. Lantos, we started a movement in 1990. People were running into the embassies for asylum. The boat left the port of Durrës, Albania, with thousands, it almost sunk, to go to Italy. 22 years later, this government still has not apologized to its people, still has not formed a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, still has not opened the communist archives, and we're wondering why Albania is not in the European Union and Romania after Ceausescu made it. So I sent a big signal. I hope you read the whole speech. If anybody wants it, I'd be pleased to send it to them. It's not on. You know what? I'm going to put it on the Truth in Government website.
Yeah, do that so that we can direct folks there. It's truthingovernment.org, and you can read this fine speech that you just gave. And this is the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. Now, just a quick question for me: do they deal? Then they deal with communism throughout the world, the history of communism throughout the world?
Throughout the world. In fact, it's only 5 years old. It was started by President George W. Bush, a Republican, and Congressman Lantos. a real stalwart, a liberal Democrat, here's a conservative Republican getting together to memorialize some of the worst crimes against humanity in history, thank God. And they formed this with the help, by the way, of the Heritage Foundation. I have to, congratulate Ed Fulner for putting up the first money to get this thing going. And guess what the memorial is? It's a pie-shaped piece of property about 3 blocks from the Senate side of the House. And guess what the symbol is in the middle of this little park? The statue that was built on Tiananmen Square. The statue to democracy that kind of looks like our Statue of Liberty. There it is, kind of as a symbol for democracy for everybody. So, and they're doing it, and they have 15 countries now listed, and thank God I went there because Albania wasn't on the list. And now it's on the list. And they're creating a virtual museum to go through the archipelagos, the Gulag. And they started with Russia and the Soviet Union. I hope to get the Albanian one on there as well. We got to educate Americans, because if we don't, we could go back and do this kind of crazy stuff.
Former Congressman Joe DioGuardi, thanks for joining us.